There is a kind of goodbye that does not look like a goodbye at all. No argument, no blocking, no final message saying, "Let's stop here." On the outside, everything continues as usual. They still reply to you. They still show up. They still use the familiar tone. They still do not do anything big enough for you to think that this relationship is coming to an end. But what most people do not realize is that sometimes a relationship does not end with the first visible action. It ends long ago inside one person, and then it simply takes time for the surface to catch up with that truth. That is why this kind of leaving always confuses the other person, because it does not arrive with an explosion. It arrives through a quiet withdrawal, a little less warmth, a little less investment. A presence that still seems to be there but no longer touches the way it used to. On the outside, almost nothing is dramatic enough to name, but inside, the other person has already started letting go. And because it makes no sound when it finally becomes visible, the one left behind often thinks everything happened too suddenly. But the truth is, for the person who is leaving, it has been happening for a very long time. This kind of detachment rarely begins with one big event. It usually begins with very small, ordinary moments that are easy to dismiss. One time they spoke and did not feel truly heard. One time they were sad and it was brushed aside. One time they felt forgotten in a situation where the other person should have noticed. Then another time, and another. On their own, those moments may not sound big enough to argue about, but when they repeat, they begin to create a kind of emotional data that the other person can no longer ignore forever. If you have ever been the person who notices small changes before everything falls apart, subscribe to the channel and keep watching, because the next part is where that silence will finally be named. What makes this kind of person different from most people is that they do not react right away. They are not the type to turn away the moment they feel hurt. Usually it is the opposite. They stay for a long time. They try to understand. They give chances. They ask themselves whether they are being too sensitive. They try to see things from the other person's point of view. They adjust the way they speak. They explain more gently. They try to express what bothers them without turning it into a fight, because they do not want to lose someone too easily, and because they do not want to make a conclusion based on one single moment. So they endure far longer than outsiders can see. But while they are still there, they begin doing something very quietly. They take note, not in a dramatic scoreboard kind of way. They simply begin to see patterns. Who shows up when needed? Who only shows up when it is convenient? Who truly listens? Who only waits for their turn to speak? Who says they care? And who actually shows it through their actions? People with deep emotional awareness often do not need one huge piece of evidence to realize that something is off. To them, small consistency is what tells the truth most clearly. And because of that, every time the same old pattern repeats, even in a small way, it still leaves a mark. That is why their detachment is not impulsive. It is cumulative. They do not leave because of one conversation. They leave because too many conversations have left them with the same feeling. They do not let go because of one disappointment. They let go because too many small disappointments eventually point in the same direction. And when a person begins to see that direction, clearly what happens next is rarely anger. It is usually stepping back. One small part first, then another. Not enough for the other person to notice immediately. Just enough to protect themselves from continuing to pour into a place that always gives back less than what is needed. So when everything finally comes to the surface, the other person is often shocked. They say, "You should have told me. Why didn't you say anything? If you felt that way, why didn't you say it sooner?" And that is the most painful part, because many times the person who leaves quietly actually did speak before. They just did not speak in a screaming voice, so it was not taken seriously. They spoke through very ordinary sentences. They pointed out a pattern. They mentioned something that made them feel hurt. They gently named what kept happening again and again. But because there was no drama, no tears, no ultimatum, the other person heard them without truly listening. If you have ever said a lot with calmness and still were not understood, comment the number 8, because some things were not left unsaid. They were simply never received. And when a person realizes they have spoken but still were not understood, they begin to stop. Not stop loving immediately, but stop repeating themselves. They stop hoping that next time will be different just because they explained one more time. They stop investing the same amount in places that keep making them feel empty. They stop offering themselves in the same old way. On the outside, they are still polite, still kind, still replying. still able to show up on time. But what has changed is inside. They no longer send their whole heart into that place. And this quiet change is the part many people never notice until it is too late. Many people mistake this kind of leaving for coldness. They think the other person is heartless, indifferent, lacking depth. But the truth is often the opposite. People who leave quietly are usually the ones who once cared the most, tried the hardest, stayed far longer than was reasonable. Because if they had not cared, they would have left sooner. And maybe they would have left more loudly. It is because they cared that they were patient. It is because they wanted to keep the relationship that they tried to fix things without hurting anyone. And it is also because they gave it so much time that when nothing changed, they no longer felt the need to explode. They simply changed their position in the relationship very quietly. This is also why this kind of person is usually very hard to bring back to the way they were once they have started letting go. Because their decision does not come from a temporary emotion. It comes from repeated observation, from what they have seen too many times. From the fact that they have checked long enough to know this is no longer an exception. Many people still wait for a breaking point, a major betrayal, or an event serious enough to justify leaving. But not everyone needs a disaster to know that something is no longer a safe place for them. Some people are very good at sensing where a relationship is heading before it officially breaks. And once they see that direction clearly, they begin leaving, even while everything still looks normal. Behind this kind of leaving is often a very high level of emotional awareness. They can read the behavior underneath the words. They notice small repetitions. They can feel when something has shifted enough times that it is no longer imagination. And because of that, they do not need a big proof the way most people demand. To them, subtle consistency is enough. If something always makes them feel unheard, unseen, or unvalued, then waiting until the pain becomes an obvious wound before leaving is already too late. If you are the kind of person who sees the direction things are going very early, comment the number 9, because that does not mean you are cold. It may simply mean you see more clearly than people think. Perhaps the saddest thing about these kinds of goodbyes is that they do not begin when someone stops loving. They begin when someone loves for too long in a place that no longer gives back in the right way. And after a while, the instinct to protect themselves finally wins. No noise, no judgment, just quietly pulling their hand away from a place that has left it hanging too many times. If this video touched an experience inside you, thank you for watching until the end. Please like and subscribe to the channel. And send this video to someone who was once called cold for leaving, when the truth is that they had been hurting and trying for a very long time before they chose silence.